Salt water doesn't rot boats, fresh water does. And one of the easiest ways for fresh water to get into a boat's structure is through badly bedded deck gear. G'day, I'm Ian Smith and I'm just reorganising my workshop now that Volunteer is in the water. But there's some important stuff I didn't get around to telling you before. In this episode I'll show you the best way to fasten and bed down deck gear on a wooden deck. I spent years repairing wooden decks that had leaked. Plywood decks are particularly susceptible. Water can travel in any direction and sit there in a warm environment that's ideal for rot. The system I'll show you works with all types of deck fittings that need to be through fastened, which is most of them, like winches, tracks, cleats, fair leads, and even the occasional exception where through fastening is impossible and you need to use screws. Step 1 is to drill the holes. Then you drill the holes out with a larger bit. A general rule is to use a drill bit twice the thickness of the fastening. So for 1/4 inch fastenings you drill a 1/2 inch hole. Then you countersink the holes. Then you fill the holes with thickened epoxy. I always use West System epoxy thickened with microfibres for a strong, dense filler. If the hole is short, it's easiest to make the mix fairly thick and knife it in until it comes through on the other side. It's best to tape up all around the holes on both sides to make the cleanup easier, particularly if the surface has already been varnished or painted. If there's still more painting to do, you can sand off any residue. If the hole is vertical and deep, it's easier to make a thinner, pourable epoxy mix and pour it in the holes, making sure you've firmly taped over the hole on the underside. When this cures, next day, clean up the surfaces and drill for the correct size of fastening. Now here's the important bit. If you fasten a fitting to a plain hole with your chosen sealant, most of the sealant will squeeze out, leaving very little to do the actual sealing. You need to countersink the edges of the hole where the fitting will land. This means that with enough sealant applied, it will fill the countersunk area, forming a sort of O-ring. This will do a better job in keeping the water out than if you don't do it. In fact, I'd even countersink the edges of the holes in a fiberglass deck. Water coming in might not rot the structure, but it sure can be annoying, even if it just means little rust stains. I generally use a polyurethane sealant like Sikaflex. If a fitting is going to be highly loaded, I use the regular marine grade that forms a strong bond even between metal and wood or a sheathed deck. If it's not highly loaded, I use Sikaflex Pro, a low modulus polyurethane that isn't as strong but remains softer and more flexible, and also has the advantage of coming in a number of colours that mean it stands out less. It will also help if you're able to countersink the hole under the fitting as well. There's 2 approaches to cleaning up the squeezed out sealant. You can clean it up straight away with a knife and the appropriate thinners, and I'd also advise thoroughly taping up the area before bedding the fitting down, especially if you already have the deck paint down. Or you can cut it away with a knife or chisel after it cures, which is mostly what I did, seeing I hadn't yet painted the deck. Seeing my deck gear all went down about the same time, I chose to fit it all first and then paint the deck. Not all deck gear is metal. Wooden cleats are easy to make and look good on a traditional boat. These ones are fastened through the coamings into tapped bronze plates. I hope it's not too late to tell you, but when you're building the boat, make sure you have access to all the underdeck areas you'll need to go to fasten off the fittings, even if it is a bit of a squeeze to get there. Also, every deck fitting requires some sort of backing block. Don't rely on just the deck thickness for strength, and it's usually best if this is planned ahead for major items like winches, and the backing blocks can be built into the deck structure. With blind holes for screws, like for these spinnaker pole chocks and these holes for wear strips of metal or tufnel, if the holes are vertical, you simply pour the epoxy in. For long horizontal screws, it's very difficult to knife epoxy in without having voids. So the fallback position is to apply unthickened epoxy to the correct size hole for the screw with a pipe cleaner. I always leave the epoxy for around 2 hours so that it is almost touch dry, and then bed the fitting on the sealant. If you go too early, the liquid epoxy and the sealant will sometimes form a gooey mess in which neither will completely cure. I hope this will help you end up with leak-proof decks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again on Smithy's Boat Shed channel.